Hello and welcome to another episode of the Aim High podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shin, and today's guest is Lily Yang, a finance and technology executive who drives financial leadership for high-growth businesses. She is currently the CFO at Strava, a mobile app and website that lets you track, share, and compare your running, cycling, and other fitness activities with a global community. She has also been on the board of CSG for 4 years. Before working at Strava, Ms. Yang was the chief accounting officer at Pintrest, helping the company go public in 2019 and expand into many countries. Thank you, Ms. Yang, for being on the Aim High podcast today.
I'm excited to be here, Ben. Thanks for having me.
All right, to start off, we'll first talk about your childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American. Ideas instilled within you from your parents and environment may have helped you become successful in where you are today. Could you please explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you grow up? Did you have any siblings? What were family dynamics like?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Now I have to dig really deep because I'm pretty old. I was born in Taiwan, in Taipei, and I immigrated to the US when I was 7 years old. At that time, I didn't speak a word of English, and I still remember my first day of school in New York City, which could only just be so overwhelming for a first-time immigrant. The classroom just felt like a whirlwind, and no one really could pronounce my real name, which is pronounced Zeli in Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's like it's it's spelled Tseli, and no one could figure out, like, is this Tilly? Is this, Saley?
Yeah.
So my teacher finally just said, "Do you want to be called Nancy or Lily?" I think that's what she said. I'm still not 100% sure today, but intuitively, I think she was asking me to pick a name, and Lily just felt similar to Zeli. So I said, Lily. And then just like that, I had a new name and a new identity to just navigate this new world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that I often tell that story is like, be careful what people ask you at a young age.
Yeah.
I'm an only child, so while that sometimes did feel very lonely, it also pushed me to really connect with people, and making friends was really important to me. And I knew I needed, more community around me, so I always had to put myself out there, and even though it felt really scary at times.
Yeah. And how did your parents' experience influence your perspective on work and success, especially as Asian immigrants to the US?
Yeah, yeah, no, watching my parents hustle and build something from nothing really made a lasting impression. Hard work wasn't just theoretical; it was very visible and constant and essential for really survival.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I first saw firsthand the value of showing up every day with grit, but also the importance of working smart in an environment that's new and staying resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I think another powerful influence that my parents had was their really strict adherence to rules. That has a double-edged sword.
Mm.
As immigrants, they were deeply concerned and cautious, always really operating by the books, not sticking out, the nail from the ground to just avoid the scrutiny. And
Mm-hmm.
that mindset really shaped how I approached my early career.
Mm.
Very systems oriented, very careful to stay within the lines and making sure I was very compliant. And it really took some time and mentorship to help me just grow out of that and challenge the status quo in the right way so that I could be more visible and seen as more, with the presence that I think they wanted in leadership.
Yeah. And as a immigrant yourself and at such a young age, did you feel any pressure to conform to certain expectations, either from your family or the broader community at like school or in the house? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. My parents wanted me to, be an accountant. So so and not the kind that I am today, the kind that actually prepares personal taxes. So like their own accountant, because that's what they knew, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even know what the difference was at the time between personal tax accounting and corporate finance. And I often ask like young folks in accounting in my team, I'm always like, "Does your parents know what you do?" And a lot of them still don't, which is I find it to be hilarious. Like this is a generational gap issue.
Hmm.
And it hasn't, it's like stood the test of time, I guess. And honestly, I still think my parents think I prepare taxes because every time tax season comes around, they're always like, "You must be really busy." Yeah, but
Yeah.
not for that. But yes, I am busy. Um, so I obviously honored their wishes to just do accounting because it was like stable and something you could rely on, good career. But gradually I forged my own path towards corporate leadership, and I was
Mm.
fortunate enough to have a really great set of mentors in my life, what I call a personal board of advisors, who helped me see beyond like just the narrow definitions of success.
Mhm.
And that really opened a lot of doors for me.
Yeah. And were there any like specific experiences besides like the story you told about like your name or lessons learned during your childhood that you believe set some foundation for your future success or like habits?
So our family, I don't know if I spoke about this, but my family owned a Chinese restaurant. So that's
Mm.
really like my parents came to the US. They were immigrants. They didn't really have a lot of skills. So working in a restaurant business, bussing tables was a way of life. And
Hmm.
eventually we were able to open our own small restaurant in Delaware.
Mm.
And that was kind of like our life, right? So working in the family restaurant and still just responsibility and resilience and early on in my life, my childhood, and I learned how to serve customers, manage money, work as part of a team, and all under the pressure of like just running a small business. No
Hmm.
task was really too small for us, and everything contributed to our family success. And I this is a funny story. I worked at Anderson, and I was so used to answering the restaurant phone when I first started at Anderson. Like, it was hard to try. So, but back in the day, they used to have phones in offices.
Hmm.
Nowadays, they don't. But and people used to call the audit room, and I, being the lowest level person, I was supposed to take all the phone calls and take all the notes. And I once picked up the phone in the audit room and answered the restaurant name. And so it was so mortifying. Everybody like looked at me like, why is she answering like Domino's Pizza? You know? And but now it's just one of those funny stories I get to laugh about and appreciate what it taught me, right? It was so
Yeah.
ingrained in me to answer the restaurant phone. I couldn't shake the habit.
Yeah, it's so funny. And was there a moment in your childhood that shaped your career ambitions or career path, even if you didn't realize it at the time? Like when you were in, like working at your family's restaurant, did you know you maybe wanted to go into business or maybe running a small business of your own? Or,
I never even thought I think to say, yeah, I saw myself as like because my parents were, I guess, entrepreneurial because they were able to establish a new life in a new country.
mm-hmm,
But maybe like I never thought about like, oh, I want to be a restaurant owner. That's certainly not what I and my parents didn't know enough about the corporate world to help me navigate what that would look like.
mm-hmm,
So it was hard to imagine anything and without that sort of experience. But just I think just adapting to a new country, a culture, a language, a mindset my parents had on doing everything right, really kind of shaped who I am as how I think about career as a whole, like doing
mm-hmm,
great work, showing up, present, engaged. Um, and ensuring that I'm like doing the best that I could, putting my best foot, because all of that will pay off. So that good work, speak for itself. That approach. Um, I think I made at times I think there were some, just as I think about career pathing, I knew that there was going to be a ceiling above my head if I continue to operate in the quiet, agreeable, or non-confrontational way. And I think just through like executive coaching over the years, um after being passed up from leadership opportunities, I realized that like just doing work quietly wasn't enough. So
mm,
that's an evolution of like when I saw others achieve that greatness and and rewards and promotions, I was like, oh, those are the things I want as well. So
Hmm.
I don't know if that's a childhood thing or just more of a just, as you grow, you know you're capable and you could achieve the same greatness.
Yeah, and as we move on to the second part of the podcast, talking about education and early career, what was your college experience like, and did you know what you wanted to pursue as a career when you were in college?
Yeah, so like I said, my parents were the ones who sort of chose accounting for me. So I went to Boston University and majored in accounting. They have one of the really great accounting programs. But along the way, I realized, oh, there's like, computers were a thing. Like back then, we didn't even have computers, right? Like we all had to go to the computer room if we needed something printed, or we didn't have our own computers. And I was like, okay, this is an like a up and coming thing. So I need to get more system savvy. So I also double majored in management information systems. That was not something my parents influenced. I just said, I think this is a new thing that's going to happen. I better learn it.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't have the luxury of like just drifting and figuring like, is this something I like? Is it not something? I just had to pick like the most practical, tangible, stable things to focus on. Going to a private school is very expensive for my parents, even though I did have some scholarship there. But I really love the structure of accounting and MIS, which both, help me like just understand the basics of business. So those were really critical pillars of me as a financial leader today. So yeah, I think the accounting was sort of like I didn't have a choice, but the MIS I added in to
Hmm.
really enhance those skill sets.
Yeah, and what did your transition look like from college to your first job?
Yeah, I was one of those things. I was recruited from Boston University to join Arthur Andersen. That BU has a great accounting program. So all the big six at the time, no longer
Hmm.
big six, but big six at the time, came on campus. I was part of a fraternity that was accounting focused. And the transition was very much trial by fire because I didn't like, even though I understood accounting, I had good grades in accounting, I really don't know what it means to go out to an audit room and work with clients. I had no idea what that was. So I just
Hmm.
had to learn really quickly how to manage tight deadlines, navigate client relationships. Um, there was lots of under pressure type of working hours. It was super intense, but it just really gave me incredible foundation at Anderson, where I was there for almost 6 years. And
Hmm.
what stood out most was the exposure I got. And, a lot of people say, oh, you've overstayed. People leave after 2 years, 3 years, get your CPA and get out. But I actually waited till I was a manager and stayed until another year after manager just to see what that was like. And then you have to make a commitment at that point, whether you want to be a lifer kind of partner of track or you want to go into industry. But I got to see such a wide range of industries, functions, and processes, end-to-end business processes. And that kind of visibility is really rare early in a career,
Hmm.
if you're just going to one company. So it really expanded my perspective beyond just accounting.
Uh-huh. And like what was like a day-to-day or like role responsibilities when you were at Arthur Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, it was like it changes, right? But like when you're a first year, you kind of your day to day would be answering phone calls, but beyond that, you would have to, typically you go with the low risk items. You go to an audit client, and you have to audit cash, you have to audit accounts receivable, accounts. Those are really they're much easier to audit because you reconcile against a bank statement or you reconcile against a subledger, and then as you graduate into your second year and your third year, you get to work on like the riskier, more complex items like inventory or accruals. And then when you're a senior, you're sort of managing the audit room,
Hmm.
because you're like the supervisor um, in the audit room. So then as you elevate to manager, you're spending more time with the clients. You're doing much more relationship managing. You're doing a lot more um, understanding their business and like what's around the corner so you could help them think about the accounting implications as they structure deals or
Hmm.
transactions.
Yeah, and why did you ultimately leave Arthur Anderson and go to like Gilead Sciences?
Yeah, I mean, so I went from Arthur Anderson to actually General Electric.
Mm-hmm.
So typically when people leave public accounting, they usually springboard into, either a large company. They decide after they have seen different sizes of companies, industries, they figure where am I gonna leverage the most and learn the most in my next career move. And GE was one of those companies that I actually passed up when I was at Boston because they were also one of the on-site recruiters that offered me a job, but I turned it
Mm.
down. And I thought of this as a second like sort of chance to work at one of the best companies with the best like financial management programs out there that
Mm.
really, GE was one that really focused on people development, and they had a lot of infrastructure in terms of like financial fundamentals and operational excellence. So that's the reason why I selected GE. I was like, okay, I'm going to learn kind of what best in class like financial organizations look like rather
Mm.
than trying to go to a small size business and trying to figure it out on my own, right?
Yeah.
Um, but obviously GE, when GE decided to relocate the division I was at, back to the East Coast, I saw it as a chance to pivot. I didn't want to move back to the East Coast anymore, so that's when I
Mm-hmm.
joined Gilead.
Mm-hmm. And at Gilead, you had or you held several positions at Gilead. Can you maybe explain your job progression there and how each role changed over time?
Yeah, I joined Gilead as an accounting manager. So this was in 2003. But I knew, like, when I kind of thought about, like, oh, healthcare is just this, like, there's this huge opportunity to be with a mission-driven company, and really focus on extracting, like, curing HIV, which they've actually been a leader in.
Hmm.
So I knew from the beginning that I wanted to have a broader view of the business, and I just thought that that opportunity was a tremendous opportunity. And they were doing a lot of acquisitions at the time. So I thought, oh, this is a place where I'm going to be able to learn a lot. So over nearly 13 years, I intentionally rotated across multiple disciplines. I started in accounting, like I said, then I moved into treasury. I led the treasury team from a cash and equity program perspective. From there, I transitioned to FP&A, where I held roles across corporate, G&A, finance, strategic finance, and then supported the head of R&D, the chief scientific officer, with all of his financial needs, and eventually led to a commercial FP&A role, first supporting the head of North America commercial, and then finally the global chief commercial officer of Gilead. So, and each role was so different, and
Hmm.
because during each period of time, Gilead was also experiencing exponential growth, right? And I think the commercial rotation was particularly energizing because we were acquiring a lot of new businesses at the time, launching blockbuster products and therapies, and navigating through a very rapidly evolving healthcare landscape that was very ambiguous, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, like the pricing and reimbursement uncertainties during the Obama administration were, with Obamacare, were front and center due to healthcare reform, and I got a hands-on like part on how those dynamics shape strategy,
Hmm.
and got to engage with the board, and like which is very very rare for an FP&A team. So I really tried to figure out where was kind of the next opportunities to grow and develop. And in some cases, when I decided to move back to the assistant controller role at Gilead, a lot of people asked me, including C-level folks, asked me, why would you want to go back to nuts and bolts when you are in the center of like this exciting time of FP&A, because you're kind of like a mini CFO
Hmm.
to the organization that you're supporting. And that exposure to the board when I had to present the healthcare reform really let me kind of see, wow, there's some incredible people here in the boardroom that I want access to. I want to hear from them more frequently, and I don't want to have like a monumental healthcare reform, which happens every 10 years, to be able to do that. So I said, well, which role is gonna enable me to be in that boardroom on a routine basis, and going back to being the VP controller was that. And
Hmm.
and 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 that was a great decision that I made, because During that time, we acquired Pharmaset for $14 billion. We launched HCV, which is again a new therapy that was unprecedented in terms of a cure in the market. First time a cure was available. So yeah, I got to we just did we did debt financing, we did a debt IPO, we did convertible debt. There was just so much that I got to learn as a result of that.
Hmm.
But every time I thought about a new opportunity, I had to think about it's not so much just a lateral move, it's a what are the things that you're gonna gain in terms of competencies and capabilities along the way to really make that year count.
Hmm. Yeah, and what were some of like your favorite projects or initiatives that you might have led at Gilead?
Oh gosh, there's like just like picking your favorite baby, and it's really, really hard because I was there for so long, right? We implemented socks for the first time. Like socks was a new thing at the time, even though right now it's Sarbanes-Oxley is like it's been around for decades, right? But that was like the first year companies had to implement socks, right?
Mm,
We implemented a new ERP from from JD Edwards to Oracle. We expanded to over 60 countries and acquired 10 different businesses, completed debt IPO. I think the commercial rotation, which I spent the most time in, was about 5 years of my career there. So a little, just under half of my time there was probably the most energizing because it was so dynamic supporting a sales and marketing function, because they are front and center in terms of how the revenue, because it's fast paced, there's constantly things that are changing, there's different elements you're dealing with the sales team, you're dealing with the marketing team, you're dealing with operations, and then you're also dealing with like the contracts that we had because drug companies have contracts with the government,
mm,
like the Medicare and the Medicaids, and so the complex pricing and the distribution, all the various players in healthcare is very complex, and I got to learn a lot around that in my role there. So I probably think that was the most dynamic and most fun at the same
hmm.
time.
Yeah, and why did you end up deciding to leave Gilead, and how did the opportunity to go to Medivation come about?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I wasn't looking to leave Gilead out of dissatisfaction or anything like that because I had a
Hmm.
great experience there. But after 13 years, and once you get to that VP level there, you find yourself just like being a professional people manager, right?
Mm,
Like you could kind of like, had a team of 100 people. I traveled a ton, and really each time it was just around going to site after site and people telling you what they did.
hmm.
And a lot of people like doing that. I probably recognize that it wasn't for me at that point. I was like, oh, I feel like I sit on so many committees and subcommittees. Like I just didn't want to do that anymore. I really wanted to get back and get closer to the work.
Mm,
Um, so I also wanted to really replicate the kind of impact that I had at Gilead. Like I had a lot of knowledge, and I was like another smaller pharma biotech could really benefit from that.
hmm.
How to help them get more discipline around scale, operational excellence, and strategic finance, right? Like how they should think about finance from a strategy standpoint. And Medivation offered that opportunity. That they were at that time a high growth oncology company that, with a very lean and team but bold ambitions, right? So I was like,
Mm,
oh, okay, they want to do a lot, they want to do acquisitions, they want to expand globally, all of the things that I had a lot of experience with. um and it aligned perfectly to kind of my passion, and what really stood out for the scope of the role. I wasn't just responsible for accounting, so I was going to be able to expand. I was responsible for finance, including FP&A, as well as strategy. So it gave me just a more holistic view of the business and allowed me to step fully into a leadership role with more of a strategic impact.
hmm.
But obviously, after, I don't know if you know this, but after 6 months in, we were under a hostile takeover by
Mm,
Sanofi, which really changed the trajectory of my time there. So it wasn't the reason I left Gilead, but became an extraordinary learning experience of being, um, you know, under a hostile takeover, but ultimately, um, just navigating the sales process through bidding ourselves out and making sure we're extracting the highest shareholder return value in this really high stakes situation. It just really sharpened my instincts as a finance leader.
Hmm. And after 12 to 13 years at Gilead, what were some of like the most important takeaways or lessons learned that you learned about yourself and maybe what you wanted to do in the future?
Yeah, I think it's more just around like, what I knew that I was capable of, like exploring new things. I knew I could learn fast. I knew I had you know, a lot of good skills that I've seen a lot. I've seen things at multiple scaled, like multiple blockbuster products multiple times with different type of complexity, distribution complexity, inventory complexity, um, it's just sort of supply chain complexity. So I've had a lot of experience in doing all of that. So I knew that whatever I decide, it's going to have to be, where do I think I could add the most value? Because that's really important to me. I always
Mm-hmm.
tell folks that are asking for advice, like, how did you decide your next role? I always think about, like, what can I contribute? Because I need to feel good that I'm making impact. It can't just all be I'm taking. You got to be giving. So what can I give? What can I learn from this experience? And then, like, and again, like, third pill, the leg of the stool would be, if it paid well and you like the product, then that's like, then the magic happens, right? But for me, it's always thinking about, like, is it balance? It can't be imbalance, because then I think there could be resentment and regret down the road.
Yeah, and how did the opportunity to go to Pinterest and be the chief accounting officer come about?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because when Medivation got acquired, obviously that was big news in the pharma biotech. Everybody was like, "Oh, she's available." So I got calls from all of the big pharma for like SVP roles, or not C-level roles, and then I got a lot from the biotechs, the mid-size, small-size biotechs for CFO roles. And then I got this random call from Pinterest, and I was like, "Is this a joke? Like, how did they even find me? Like, why would they even be following biotech news, right?" Um, and I still, to this day, I have no idea. That I must be such a good, like, recruiter sourcer to figure out, like, maybe there would be some interest there. But at the time, my daughter was 16, and I came home and I told my husband, like, at dinner, I was like, "Oh, Pinterest called," and I didn't even know anything about Pinterest. I sort of knew, but not really. I didn't use the product, and my daughter just like, oh my God, like, thought I was like a celebrity or something. You're going to go to Pinterest? And I was like, "Oh no, I'm just talking to them." And I felt like a cool mom for the first time in my career, and that really was impactful. But
Mm-hmm.
going back to the point of that might have been the thing that kind of pushed me over on the decision, because going back to the point of, did I think I could help Pinterest be successful? Yes, because they were essentially one country at the time, 300 million in revenue. They were looking to scale globally, expand footprint. They were thinking about doing a lot of M&A. They were, sort of beefing up for an IPO readiness, being a publicly traded company. I was like, I could do that. That's something I could do. And then
Mm-hmm.
I thought about, like, I've never taken a company public, and I've never been in consumer tech. I would love to work with this new generation. Typically in pharma biotech, the average age is in, like, sort of late 30s, and then average age at a tech company is like late 20s. So I knew I wanted to work in I knew I wanted to understand what it would be like to work with a different generation of folks, especially a new generation that was going to dominate the workplace in the next, like, 10-15 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a great opportunity for me to balance the two things. And then, my daughter was the sort of the cream of the crop that kind of tipped the scale.
Yeah, and what did your role consist of as the chief accounting officer at Pinterest?
Yeah, yeah. I just, as CAO, I led general revenue, technicals, really kind of the building blocks of accounting,
Mm.
including like tax, treasury, procurement, and then I got, on top of that, as the years went by, I took on, like, workplace, which is like facilities, and then I stood up new things that didn't exist at Strava. I'm sorry, at Pinterest before, which is like uh, internal audit, right? As a private company, you don't need an internal audit department, but I had to stand that up right before an IPO.
Hmm.
And then financial reporting infrastructure and to again to support being a public company. Um, but I think the work didn't just stop there. It's like post IPO was really about building a finance function that could scale globally, like that continue at that scale. When we went public, we were probably about a little over 1 billion in revenue, and then when I left, about 2 billion. So really
Hmm.
focus on really growing the team, deepening automation, supporting businesses as we could get into new markets, new complexities as we launch new kind of features and collaborations and partnerships.
Yeah, and what was the process of helping Pinterest go public?
Yeah, it's a complex process. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of people. It's like a village. But it was really fun. It's it's it. I kind of think of it as it's an event, right? It's an event in that you have to prepare for. But what really shines and what really is important is sort of the event is you gotta file the S1. You gotta do the road shows. You gotta get through the diligence with your underwriters, right? That's the event. Like there's a lot of things you got to get through. SEC comment letters. So there's you got to get insurance. All of those things are part of the event. But I think what's most important in an IPO is, are you ready to be able to do like a mini event, a mini celebration every quarter thereafter? And do you have the proper protocols and the controls and the just the resources and all of the sort of discipline around being able to execute this on a very constrained period of time every
Mm.
quarter thereafter? So for me, I really focused on that as the I guess the sort of the winning formula, not the fact that like, you threw a bunch of resources at getting to the event. For me, it was really about the sustainability and the durability thereafter.
Yeah, and how did serving in the C-suite differ from some of your previous roles, and what new challenges did you encounter in the C-suite?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was the chief accounting officer, but I didn't really sit with obviously with the C-suite in terms of the CEO and the CFO were part of the C-suite. So I think it just, being a Section 16 officer just definitely came with different level of accountability.
Mm.
And even though there was ambiguity, I had to physically sign that these numbers are good and I was personally liable. So I think that just brings a level of sort of personal risk to the picture.
Yeah.
But I also think like just being part of the team that looked at the numbers and ensuring that our business was healthy and always kind of preparing for that next, being in the boardroom and preparing for that next earnings. Um, and the implications were much heavier, right? Because you're
Mm.
doing in this public market, people don't understand it as well. So you have to be able so there's no real playbook. So you have to articulate what it is that shows the strength of your business. So it just had to lead with uncertainty, especially like during that time we were going through the pandemic, and
Mm.
just trust your judgment more than ever. And like it was just one of those things. Initially when we hit the pandemic, we thought, gosh, like we have to buckle down and things are going to get bad. But it turned out, because everybody was at home, everybody was creating Pinterest boards and remodeling their houses, and as a result, that there was actually a huge like sugar high and windfall for a company like Pinterest at the time.
Yeah, and where do you think you made the biggest impact at Pinterest in your role?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think certainly the IPO and getting the company prepared
Mm.
for an IPO, was definitely really a fun experience because you really are like literally, I mean, you just spend days with people flipping page after page, hundreds of pages, and there are times where things got heated, right? Um, but I think overall I'm most proud of really the company's transformation from being private to public, and
Mhm.
they've sustained a really nice run even post my departure, which means that I built something very durable.
Yeah. And now, as we move on to talk more about your current career, how did you get the opportunity to join Strava, and what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, I wasn't looking to leave Pinterest. Pinterest was actually really great to me, and I'm very thankful for all of their support over the years. They were the ones who, after we went public for about a few quarters, I said, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to get a ton out of this experience. I'm going to get you guys through socks and so forth." And they said, "Well, what about a board seat?" Like I didn't even think about a board seat, and they were the ones who said, "What about a board seat? You want a board seat? We could help you get a board seat, and we'll send you to to get a mentor on this. We'll help you invite sort of introduce you to different people that could help you with that." So they were really really great. So I had no intention of leaving Pinterest. But after 2+ years of post IPO, I think I was sort of like, okay, open to listening to people when they called. So Strava called, and
Hmm.
I actually didn't know the app too well either. I first discovered the app years prior to that while I was hiking in Machu Picchu, and was my friends actually recorded it on there, and they had the actual recording. So I went back and looked at the recording. I signed up, and I went to their account, and I was like, oh yeah, hey, there's a picture of me, and I thought, wow, that was really cool. And it was just visually compelling. Like I was able to like see the hike that we did, and there was like just a really great memory. And then I saw all the really commentary from others. I was like, wow, this is a very motivating app.
Hmm.
Not toxic at all. And how widely it was like, like recognized outside of the US, right, for an app like
Hmm.
ours. So that I think that experience probably planted a seed when I got the call from Strava. I'm like, hey, I know you. Um, so so um, I wasn't like a hardcore performance athlete. I'm still not today, but I'm active, but I'm not like I always thought Strava was a performance like app. Like you have to be a hardcore ultra marathoner to be on there. So I really approached the process with authenticity. I told them like I don't know the app well,
Mm.
but from what I see, I like it, and I think acknowledging that you don't have to like fake it till you make it. I think it's showing up and being authentic and being truthful about your desire to learn. I focus on what I really could bring to the table rather than trying to defend that I'm not a hardcore passionate user, right?
Mm.
I brought deep experience scaling companies globally across tech and biotech, and navigating high growth startups. I talked about just being at billion-dollar organizations, and scaled them $2 billion a few times.
Yeah.
How I've operated at many altitudes, like from late stage private to IPO to Fortune 500, and through multiple M&A deals on both sides of the table, from selling and acquiring. And what really surprised me when I joined, Strava, is how nascent some of the internal systems and processes were still after like being a company for 14 years.
Mm.
Um, so that really just strengthened my conviction that I was like, oh, I actually did arrive at the right time to help build and shape the next phase of that growth.
Hmm. And how would you summarize your core responsibilities as Strava's CFO?
Yeah, as CFO, I'm responsible for the traditional finance functions like financial planning, forecasting, reporting, tax, treasury, risk, and controllership.
Hmm.
And those are obviously critical to ensuring we're making informed, data-driven decisions. And my role extends into really shaping the company's broader strategic direction. I partner closely with executive team, just to guide us through opportunities and thinking about risks at the same time, and managing and really balancing the two of making financial discipline decisions, and really making sure we have long-term sustainability. Beyond finance, I also lead our business strategy team, which also oversees corporate development.
Mm.
It's a small but mighty team. which helps define the company's long-term strategy, supports all the functions in their strategic planning process, so functional plans. We also analyze the competitive dynamics, the landscape, how it's changing, who's in the market, who's coming, who's winning in the market, who's in the market. And we also identify opportunities to expand our audiences and footprint. Like where
Mm.
should we go next? Where's our total addressable market? Where are they located? Who are they? What do they look like? What does the serviceable market look like?
Mhm.
And then for about 2 years, I also manage our data analytics team, which is tightly embedded with our product teams to support roadmap development. They do experimentation, they do dashboards on the product kind of initiatives and engagement and feature usages. So that gave me a front row seat to how to just get insight in directly shaping product innovation, which was like the first time I've had that experience in my career.
Mhm. And what would you say like a typical work week looks like for you right now?
Yeah, it's really a blend. It changes, but we always start, the week off with our weekly business review. So that's like a staple, right? Or like exec team review. Exec teams get together or stand up on Mondays, and we have a weekly business review on Tuesdays. But really, it's just a blend of what's going on, right?
Mm.
But a lot of cross-functional collaboration, keeping the engines of the business running smoothly. We're doing an acquisition right now, so disproportionately from probably since the first of the year, I've been spending a lot more time on just getting the acquisition executed and then hopefully close in the next 6 weeks.
Mhm.
But a huge portion of my time is really spent in meetings with the executive team to align on priorities and one-on-ones with my direct reports to make sure that we're aligned on what needs to be completed for the week, for the next kind of milestone, whether it's a board meeting, whether it's a management review or senior leadership meeting. Um, and ensuring that I'm providing the support my team needs, right? To
Mhm.
get through those initiatives. I also spend a lot of time engaging with external stakeholders, whether that's auditors, bankers, investors, industry peers. I spend a lot of time networking with my peers and understanding what they're challenged with so that I could, like, if I haven't experienced it yet, that'll give me some insight into like what's next, as well as vendors. I like to know like what are other company with this kind of AI evolution that's happening. I want to see what
Mm.
our vendors are doing so they could help us pace to a even more automated, more streamlined way of running our processes. And I think all of those things are really a really important part of your entire ecosystem and long-term planning. So I really spend a lot of time focus on those things.
Mhm.
And since we're doing, with the acquisition, we had to do some financing for that. So there's always like financing work with bankers, investors on the equity and the debt side of things.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and what has been like your favorite project that you've just loved to work on at Strava?
yeah, I think yeah, just talked a little bit about the weekly business review. That's one of the most like I think one of the reviews that I feel like I'm most proud of, even though it is like just something so like standard and staple because it's evolved into more than just a meeting. It's really become a critical engine from how we operate. So
Mm.
instead of just like reporting out the numbers, it's really like how do we action on some of those numbers? How do we gain more better insight into them? And it's not easy. It's you're and you're trying to pivot every week, and it's like based on some data set um that is hard to discern, especially with a lot of noise, and you have to filter out in the economic environment.
Mm.
But I just love really proud and love that meeting because it really it helps us like get really focused on what we need to do. And so we're not just waiting for like the next cycle of the forecast to figure out whether we need to pivot on a roadmap initiative or um, consider how we think about marketing or sales strategies.
Hmm. And like you mentioned before, like how does serving in like the actual C-suite now as like CFO differ from your previous roles, and like what are some like new challenges
Yeah,
role?
yeah. No, when you're in the C-suite, it's like you can't point to that person above you and be like, that's your problem. You're accountable, right? You're accountable. If the numbers aren't meeting what we assumed, we have to figure it out. And it's up to that team, the C-suite, to mobilize the team, to guide the team, to provide the support and the knowledge that for them to shape that next the outcome of what we're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
So it is heavy at days because sometimes you like it's like one data point. Can you act on it? Two data points, and then three, and then sometimes you're trying different things and it doesn't work, right? And you're just sort of like, okay, we're at our wits' end here. We don't know what's working, and then like that fifth time that you try something, you're like, wow, that really hit, and that was it. But you have to be resilient, you have to be patient, and you can't be reactive because everyone in the company is looking at you for stability
Hmm.
um, pacing. And if you're reactive, then everybody's gonna like run in different directions, right? Like grounding everybody on the facts and what's worked, what hasn't worked, and let's try different, like let's figure out what to try next.
Mm, yeah. And as a board member at CSG, what are some of your main responsibilities and areas of oversight there?
Yeah, as a board member, you're in a governing role, right? I
Hmm.
help guide the company's strategic direction and obviously oversee risk management for long-term financial and operational health. I serve on both the so I obviously am a board member, but I serve on subcommittees, audit and compensation committees, which
Hmm.
really gives me a really broad perspective on how executive comp and incentives align with strategy execution, performance outcomes, as well as like risk oversight. So I collaborate closely with the management team, particularly around like growth strategies and M&A. And since joining in 2021, we've led multiple acquisitions. I think it's six in total.
Hmm.
Executed a convertible debt. I think we just announced a term loan, and we're sort of enhancing our capital structure, and we're driving durable and sustained growth across a bit diversification because we're highly concentrated in cable. So that was all part of the strategy, and the team has done a great job executing against all of those.
Moving on to the fourth part of the podcast, talking about challenges and overcoming obstacles as an Asian American leader. Being an Asian American in a leadership role comes with its own sets of challenges. What were some of the obstacles you faced in your industry, particularly due to your background?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think as an Asian woman, you're constantly walking, as any woman, I think, maybe more so being Asian, walking the line between being nice and being strong is very tricky, right? You're too nice, you're seen as a pushover, you're too strong, you're labeled aggressive, and for a long time I felt pulled between those cultural expectations of being compliant, like I
Hmm.
talked about previously, and the corporate pressure to be louder, more assertive. I mean, they don't say be louder and be more so. They say be more engaged, be more visible, right? Like there's like nice words to because you have to then talk over somebody, right? That feels to me very assertive. And it
Yeah.
didn't always feel natural to me. But eventually, maybe with age or just growth, I don't know. Just stopped trying to conform. And maybe it's like you gain more confidence. You're like, okay, well that you tried it and that didn't turn out to be bad. And
Hmm.
so I stopped conforming to other people's expectations, and I think that helped quite a bit on focusing on doing the great work and showing up with authenticity, and owning your own point of view is going to be critical. And I think also for people to find a place that really honors that is really important, because not all companies do honor that,
Hmm.
honor in a way that like they support that sort of psychological safety for women, and especially for Asians, to be able to kind of, whether it's like they need more time to digest things, they're not going to be the one that interrupts others, right? Like they create that safe space for you to grow and develop and be heard, I think
Hmm.
is really important.
Hmm. And what role has your cultural background played in shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader? And how have you found ways to use it as a strength in your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's definitely my cultural definitely I talked a lot about examples of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But probably not in the stereotypical way that people assume. I think naturally I could be direct, passionate, and I could move very fast. So I think I actually was taught culturally to slow down and be less direct and right. So I probably I definitely carry a deep respect for accountability and thinking about long-term impacts, because that's been ingrained in me in an early age. But I found that I lead best by being in the mix. Like I talked about like just being like, rubber stamping things wasn't my cup of tea. So I find myself being energized most when I get to roll up my sleeve, staying close to the work and building trust with the people that I enjoy working with the most. Um, so I think it's okay to bring. I've learned that it's okay to bring some intensity to the table as long it's like it's paired with clarity and authenticity and respect, right?
Yeah.
Especially with high stake moments. I've gone through so many of those through the IPO, through acquisitions. Like, some of these acquisitions, when you're negotiating, you like literally nonstop for 15 hours. You're just in one room and you go back to another room. And same with selling a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think just the blend of urgency and thoughtfulness has really helped me, sort of get people aligned and moving forward.
Yeah, and as we move on to the final part of the podcast talking about advice and inspiration, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone stepping into their first finance leadership role?
Yeah, I think I didn't do this, and I think it kind of cost me a little bit. I think, don't just focus on, as a finance person, you think, oh, I'm just supposed to focus on the finance numbers. That's what I'm hired to do.
Mm-hmm.
Really learn the business inside and out, right? Like finance leaders have the ability, it's like a luxury to connect, to be that like connective tissue within the company, right? They get to see all of the different groups, how they do things, so you could be that connector. But beyond that, you could be the connector of strategy, execution, and storytelling as well. And that only happens when you truly understand the product, the people, and the community that you're serving.
Mm.
So, again, don't get too, I think, especially for accountants who tend to look backwards, they get very fixated on the numbers.
Mm. Yeah, and as a CFO, what are some traits you think make someone successful in that type of role?
I would say curiosity, I'd say self-awareness. You don't want to be the person who's always talking in the room, right? Because even though you have a lot of knowledge to give, and you want to share that knowledge, it's really important to be self-aware that like maybe others will have a different perspective that is even like more current and more progressive than the one that has worked previously in the
Yeah.
past, right? So curiosity, so ask lots of questions and be self-aware how you're showing up. Resilience. So just really, I always go back to how I've thought about my career progression and pushing myself to do something different every year, because it really is not just how many years. It's not like I certainly talk about like I have 30 years of experience, but what make those, but somebody with 10 years may have much broader, deeper experience than I have in 30, right? So it's
Mm.
like making those years count, I think is really important. So taking on, be sort of, there was an article I just read about like, be that person that like seeks pain. I actually think, Jansen from NVIDIA also said this, like, I wish, to some Harvard students, like, I wish you all lots of pain or something like that. But that is so true. It's like, go for the tough projects, right? Go for the places where it's not like a switch on, right? It's messy, because you're gonna learn in those like the hardest moments,
Mm.
because growth is not comfortable, so
Yeah.
it's not gonna happen there.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned mentorship briefly before and how some of your mentors helped you speak up in your roles, but did you have any other mentors, and what were some of the pieces of advice that they gave to you too?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think I have a lot of mentors, formal and informal, throughout the year, throughout my career. And I really, and now I'm still meeting them every day. Like I had coffee with somebody this week and I was like, gosh, I would love for you to mentor me, like, and again, it's not a formal, so it's kind of like, can I call you every 3 months and
Yeah.
bounce some ideas off of you, right? I think you have to find that personal board of your trusted voices, people who may know your strength, or have gone through what you've gone through, or is going to go through something that you might want to go through, that could call you out on your blind spots and
Hmm.
nudge you when you're not comfortable. So, one of them actually, if it feels easy, you're probably not growing. Like kind of what we said. That's just
Yeah.
that really stuck for me. Like when things get easy, that's when you're like, okay, it's probably time to look for something else.
Hmm. And how do you stay motivated, especially when things aren't going the way you want or you're facing high pressure moments in the workplace?
Yeah, it's there's hard days, right? Especially when they say it's lonely at the top, it really does. But having that network of peers, because
Mm.
sometimes I just need to pick up the phone and call one of my CFO peers and be like, "Have you gone through this? Is this crazy?" And they validate your feeling. Like, no, it is crazy because you can't talk to your other, work peers about it.
Yeah.
So, I think grounding yourself on the why this work matters, why am I doing it, helps provide that clarity on like this is important work. We're bringing value and helping people live better lives like that. Those are all things that I ground the mission of the company.
Mm.
I also give myself permission to take a beat, right? Like recalibrate and re-engage. Um, sometimes just taking a little break and naming what's hard is enough to like be therapeutic, right?
Mm. Yeah. And how do you define success now, and how has that definition changed since the beginning of your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think in early in my career, like I think proving myself success was like, I did it, I accomplished this, and but I think now it's really about or grow like the next promotion, right? The next title.
Yeah.
But I think now it's about impact, integrity, and growth for me. For me, it's like, the people around me, who are they? Are they supporting me? Like those speak volumes to like who you are as a character and why they want to support you. That to me like speaks much more volume about you who you are. So it's like shifting the mindset is like what I've accomplished to what I've enabled. And
Mm.
I think the board work has helped me like just think about it that way. It's like I'm not physically doing the work, I'm help guide their thinking and I've enabled them to be successful.
Yeah. And for the last question, if you could leave listeners with one takeaway about building a meaningful and impactful career, what would it be?
Yeah, and I think I talked about like be intentional, right? Be like make every day, month, quarter, year, whatever, be by choosing something that stretches you, get uncomfortable, surround yourself with people who challenge you, who believe in you, and help you become better every day. And I think that's that'll work itself. Like that'll then translate into something successful because you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the Aim High podcast today. I really enjoyed our conversation. And
Yeah,
yeah,
same here.
all right. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. Have a good one. Take care.